You will not defeat the famine looking at each other.
For decades, Bishop T.D. Jakes stood as one of the most recognizable and respected voices in modern faith leadership, a man whose sermons crossed denominational lines and reached millions across the globe. To many, he was not just a pastor, but a steady presence during life's hardest seasons, someone whose words carried comfort, strength, and clarity when people felt lost. His rise was not just about influence or numbers, it was about connection. People trusted him because he spoke openly about fear, struggle, resilience, and faith, and he did so with a rare mix of authority and compassion. The Potter's House became more than a church. It became a spiritual home for people searching for meaning. Over time, Bishop Jakes' leadership grew into a global ministry, with books, conferences, and broadcasts that shaped conversations far beyond the pulpit. He carried that responsibility with grace for many years, and few imagined a day when the world would begin wondering how the man who uplifted so many was truly doing himself. When subtle changes sparked quiet concern. Longtime followers are often the first to notice when something feels different. And in Bishop Jakes' case, those changes were subtle at first. There was no dramatic moment, no announcement, no sudden disappearance. Instead, people noticed small shifts, his pace slowing slightly, moments of pause during sermons, or fewer appearances at events he once attended without fail. Individually, these details meant little, but together they created a sense of concern among those who had followed his ministry closely for years. Some dismissed it as the natural result of age or an intense schedule, while others quietly wondered if the weight he had carried for so long was finally taking its toll. What made these observations significant was not curiosity, but care. People weren't looking for scandal, they were looking for reassurance. They wanted to know that the leader who had poured so much into others was still being supported and protected himself. The power of silence and the growth of questions. As time passed and no official explanation emerged, the absence of information began to speak louder than words. In an age where leaders often share every detail of their lives, silence can feel unsettling, even when it is intentional. Bishop Jakes and his family chose privacy, and while that decision was understandable, it left room for interpretation. Social media, blogs, and online discussions filled the gap, with people offering theories ranging from simple exhaustion to more serious concerns, though none were confirmed. What stood out was how deeply emotional the conversations became. This was not detached speculation. It was worry rooted in gratitude and loyalty. People who had leaned on Bishop Jakes' teachings during their own crises felt unsettled by the thought that he might be carrying unseen burdens alone. The silence, meant to protect personal boundaries, unintentionally fueled anxiety among those who cared the most. A ministry built on relentless dedication. To understand why concerns grew so strong, one has to understand the sheer scale of Bishop Jakes' life's work. His ministry was never limited to Sunday sermons. It involved constant travel, leadership meetings, writing projects, conferences, mentorship, and global outreach. For years, he carried multiple roles at once: pastor, author, speaker, counselor, and visionary. He often spoke openly about the responsibility of leadership and the emotional toll of guiding others through pain while managing his own pressures. This honesty made him relatable, but it also revealed a truth many leaders face. There is little room for rest when so many people depend on you. Over time, supporters began to realize that the strength they admired so much may have come at a personal cost. The question was no longer whether Bishop Jakes was strong, but whether he had been given the space to recover and renew himself. When absence became noticeable. As months went by, Bishop Jakes' absence from certain major events became harder to overlook. These were gatherings he had historically prioritized, moments where his presence was almost expected. When others stepped in to lead instead, curiosity turned into concern. Still, there was no sense of abandonment. When he did appear, he remained composed, warm, and reassuring, offering messages of hope that reflected the same wisdom people had always known. Yet, followers noticed that his appearances were more selective, his schedule more measured. Rather than alarming people, this shift prompted reflection. Many began to ask whether this was a sign of intentional rest rather than crisis. It raised a larger question about how leaders manage longevity and whether stepping back occasionally should be seen not as weakness, but as wisdom earned through experience. A necessary pause, not an ending. One of the most important clarifications the family shared was that this season was not about retirement or withdrawal, but about balance. Bishop Jakes was not disappearing, he was recalibrating. This distinction mattered deeply to those who had grown up spiritually under his leadership. A pause suggested intention, not decline. It reframed the narrative from loss to preservation, from fear to foresight. By stepping back strategically, Bishop Jakes was modeling something many leaders struggle to do, recognizing limits before reaching burnout. This perspective helped shift the conversation away from speculation and toward respect. Supporters began to see this season not as a closing chapter, but as a thoughtful transition that could allow his influence to continue in healthier, more sustainable ways. Sarah Jakes Roberts steps forward. As Bishop Jakes adjusted his pace, Sarah Jakes Roberts naturally began taking on a more visible leadership role. Her presence brought both excitement and reflection. She carried her own voice, her own perspective, and a message that resonated strongly with a new generation. While comparisons were inevitable, many saw her leadership not as a replacement, but as an expansion of the ministry's reach. Her authenticity and openness reflected the same values her father had long championed, even as she addressed issues through her own lens. This shift encouraged conversations about legacy, succession, and growth. Rather than diminishing Bishop Jakes' impact, her leadership highlighted the strength of what he had built, a ministry capable of evolving while honoring its foundation. A community responds with compassion. As understanding replaced uncertainty, the response from supporters became overwhelmingly compassionate. Messages of prayer, gratitude, and encouragement poured in from around the world. People shared stories of how Bishop Jakes' words had carried them through grief, fear, and personal transformation. Many expressed relief that he was prioritizing his health, seeing it as an act of wisdom rather than retreat. The narrative began to change. Instead of asking what was wrong, people began asking how they could support him, how they could reflect the same care he had shown them for so many years. This shift revealed the depth of the bond between leader and community, built not on perfection, but on shared humanity. A larger conversation about leadership and rest. Bishop Jakes' journey sparked a broader discussion within faith communities about the cost of constant leadership. Pastors, ministers, and organizational leaders began speaking openly about burnout, pressure, and the unrealistic expectation of endless availability. His experience became a reminder that strength does not mean ignoring limits, and that faith does not eliminate the need for rest. By choosing to slow down, Bishop Jakes unintentionally gave others permission to do the same. His story encouraged leaders to seek balance, support, and sustainability, reframing rest as an essential part of service rather than a failure to endure. Vulnerability as a new kind of strength. What ultimately resonated most with people was not the concern itself, but what it revealed about leadership. Bishop Jakes' willingness to be seen as human, capable of fatigue, in need of rest, did not weaken his legacy. It strengthened it. It reminded people that true leadership is not about appearing invincible, but about modeling honesty, humility, and self-awareness. In stepping back when necessary, he demonstrated the same wisdom he had preached for years. His story became less about unanswered questions and more about example, showing that caring for oneself is not separate from serving others. It is essential to it. Watching with hope, not fear. Today, the conversation around Bishop T.D. Jakes has settled into something quieter and more thoughtful. People continue to watch, not with alarm, but with hope. They understand that seasons change, roles evolve, and leadership adapts. Whether he returns with the same pace or chooses a more focused presence, his influence remains undeniable. The story is no longer about speculation, but about continuity, legacy, and faith carried forward. And as the world watches what comes next, it does so with respect, gratitude, and a deeper understanding that even the strongest voices need moments of rest to keep speaking with purpose.